Hello and welcome to Lunchable Go-to-Market Ops. I am Sarah Lane-Hawn and with me is
Danielle Urban.
we are your hosts and we are serving up grab and go HubSpot strategy every weekday for 15 minutes or less. In today's episode, we're continuing our theme about attribution. And today we're talking about getting buy-in from your executive team in order to implement attribution modeling. Danielle, why is this important? Why are we talking about it?
There again, we talked earlier this week about how all of my conversations start in the marketing team. Marketing is the first one to have their budget pulled away when things don't go well. And so I think marketing always needs to have some numbers to show for how things get done and how their efforts matter so that they can turn around and build a strategy on what works to help grow the company and ensure that they have enough budget and resources. But I think that case study of, making sure that it works and you have numbers to show can be true across all parts of the business. Customer success can help upsell, sales is selling, and everybody needs to show that they're pulling their weight to bring in revenue for the company.
Yeah. Now, I do think that getting executive buy-in, that process is going to be super impacted by who starts this conversation, where it
Yes.
originates. Like, I have seen organizations that are looking to raise their next funding round. And so attribution comes from the CEO. And he says,
Mhm.
hey, I need to have these answers. I've been told, right, that I need to have
Where are you
this.
going?
And so it's a no-brainer that they're going to invest in an attribution model of some sort. But having to figure out kind of the cross-team alignment is really the holdup there. There's other places though where marketing is saying, hey, we're always being asked to provide, you know, revenue justification for our efforts. We need to have, support from data and, database management to figure out how to do that. But they don't have the budget to go invest in a $30,000, $50,000 a year attribution model. And I would argue they shouldn't have to because it's not just a marketing benefit, right? When you're in that situation, I feel like it's very different trying to figure out how to get buy-in from the organization and have to give kind of an ROI justification for even starting the process.
Yeah, for sure. And it's such a great point to say, where does it start? Because if it's the CEO starting the conversation, then who's building it? Hopefully, you have an ops team that can
Right.
really step in there, but otherwise, it's probably coming down to marketing because they typically own the CRM. It may be cases where sales owns the CRM, but then, of course,
Mhm.
sales is going to be like, well, look at us, look at all these phone calls we made, um, look at all these outbound emails we sent, and start to piece it together that way. But it really, you need to have something to show. And so this is where we move from like, okay, who's asking the question and what question do we need to answer, down into how do we start to build these systems and where do we build these systems. And we talked about how your CRM has a lot of that information, but then if you want to move beyond what's already there, a lot of it is like, we're starting from today for anything that we implement. It can be
Yeah.
difficult to, even with a third party software, plug something in and have it mine back through your data and look for all those touch points. There are ways, because HubSpot
Yeah.
captures a lot of, one-to-one engagement. Those all
Cool.
get recorded as activities, and they exist in a way that you can access them later. That is not very obvious within the HubSpot app itself.
Right.
But it still means that, you're moving into that area where it's going to get pretty fragmented. And when you need to, answer the question, you need to know what the question is, and then you need to figure out what resources need to get put in place to get it done.
Yeah. So let's talk about getting buy-in from the perspective of a marketing team, since that's who we both typically are working most with. So your marketing manager, head of marketing director, has decided, hey, we really need some sort of marketing attribution in order to align our revenue impact with, our marketing output. What would be your advice on how to go about putting together kind of a justification for them to ask for support from the executive team to onboard that?
Yeah, you get in the weeds so fast on that one because you have to sort of get to that level of granularity where you have an understanding on your own team. Like, what is the quote unquote model that you're going to agree on? And model is even turning into a loaded word here because
Yeah.
you have first touch, which we talked about. You have original source, which is like the first time someone has ever encountered your digital presence. And then you have what created the contact. And then you have what was the last activity they did before they became an MQL? What was the thing they did before they became a deal? What was marketing influence over the pipeline? Did marketing have any activity while they were in a deal that helped to close that deal? And so when you
Yep.
start to look at, marketing trying to justify their existence, and like showing their contribution to revenue, there's like marketing generated, and that's where you start to look at who was the first touch point, and then you can look at marketing influence. And I think it's very important to separate those, and I think we have that topic
Yeah.
another time this week.
Yep.
But we you really have to separate those so that you can show clear numbers and you don't just get caught up in the details, because when you start to dive into what all those activities are and hashing out how you want to label them and how you want to aggregate them, and start to run those numbers, then you will get lost very fast and like really lose sight of what you're trying to do if you don't have that agreed upon, at least in your team. And then when you
Yeah.
turn around to present it back, you can come in with a clear message that everyone agrees on.
Yeah, and I think clarity is a good point to call out from the very beginning, right? When you're articulating this to your executive team that you need to get sign off from, hey, we really need to put in attribution. This is the thing that needs to take precedence. There's two things that I think I would harp on. One of them is that clarity, right? They're asking you for clarity constantly. Every time you provide a report with numbers, they're double tapping in and saying, do we trust it? Is it real?
Mhm.
But is that really what the number is? Right. And they're going to be asking those questions intentionally. Being able to turn that back around and say, hey, I want to be able to provide so much granular clarity that we all know exactly what these numbers mean, that there is consistency between sales and marketing in terms of how we interpret them, that we know that we are accounting for 100% of the revenue if we're doing a revenue attribution, right? Pitch, that we can say, instead of everything being from an influence perspective and multiplying, right? We can look at our actual revenue divided into the buckets. Like, I think being able to say, you'll be able to trust the numbers
Mhm.
and really stand behind that is something that is very appealing to an executive team, because they don't want to spend all their time questioning and then doubting and not knowing for sure if that's a trustworthy number to bring up to the board, right?
Yeah.
So I think having that clarity is important. The other piece is what you talked about, which is that a lot of times it's hard to go back with real accuracy and do historical
Yeah.
attribution. You can get enough that it can still advise and instruct
Mhm.
directionally, but I'm always very clear that that is all that that is, and we do not hold those numbers as like a hard set truth.
Right.
Um, and so I think that's important to articulate at the beginning for buy-in, because they want the hard set truth. And so if you're able to say, hey, from the day that you give me sign off, we're counting in the future 6 to 9 months
Mhm.
before you can have full confidence in these numbers. If we do
Right.
it today, in 6 to 9 months, complete confidence. If we
Mhm.
postpone this again and we don't do it till next year, you're a year and a half away
Right.
from having the confidence in those numbers. And I think those two pieces are probably going to be the most influential in getting an executive team to be like, okay, this actually is important, and it's important now because it's important to me, because then I will in 6 months be able to tell my board, these are the numbers. I trust them. I know exactly how my team came up with them. And
Yeah.
so that would be my advice, is like, hinge on timing and hinge on accuracy, and hopefully that gets you the buy-in that's needed.
Yeah. And I there's also sort of this maturity scale where you can use what HubSpot has out of the box. We've already talked about the limitations in that. You can start to build your derivative model and properties and workflows. And that is, maybe you can reach back into some, old URLs for conversions or some of the activities that have been recorded. But that's going to be a lot of engineering and parsing that might not be trustworthy. Like, it's tough to really know that every single one of those data points is accurate, but it still means that you have something to go off of. So that's like step two. Step three is, you implement all of the pieces, you get the workflows and the properties set, you've got, a documented process that you're moving ahead with that you all can trust and are aligned on, and know what it's going to accomplish. And then a step beyond that would be looking at third-party software. So you've got, a huge range of price points and, complexity in that. You can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year if you really want to go crazy. But it
Easily.
could open some doors. So it depends on, what does your executive team and your board need from this? And a lot of times you kind of have to work through that whole maturity scale. You have to show that you can get something useful and show that you can build a strategy around what's already there. So your attribution journey might be a 3-year one if you start today.
Yeah, no, it absolutely can. And I think from a maturity perspective, like, you also have to understand that anything that you do, anything you're going to build, anything you're going to use is all going to have a limitation factor.
Mm-hmm.
And so figuring out just what works best for you as a company is what's going to be most important. And I think for me, since I work with like B2B startups, like the quantity scale is not their main thing of their pipeline, right? Like, it's consultative sales, it's larger sticker prices, longer, sales cycles. So I do think that some of the third-party software, like, when you have so many data points and such a mature marketing system that you just need to be processing hundreds of thousands of touch points, like, absolutely understand why that would be extremely beneficial in that scenario. If you're a B2B startup mode, though, and you have decent coverage in marketing, but we're not talking hyper personalization in every single channel, right? And we're not talking hundreds or thousands of new opportunities every month, then I do think there's just like a capacity amount where it's like we can do a lot of this through workflows and through other things that we're manually thinking through all the kind of paths people could enter and tagging the most important ones to us, right?
Right.
And there's a level there that just like you get to a scaling point, it makes sense. If you're not there, I don't see it. Like, I don't see the value of these super complex
Agreed.
platforms unless you need that level of accuracy at huge scale.
Right. I think both you and I have never really worked in a company that is big enough to think about that.
Or just in like a B2C. Like, I feel like if
Yeah.
you're in a B2C realm, the way in which you need to do attribution is going to be very different because of the scale.
Yeah.
So like, I think
And
it's just your sales process.
that has limitations too, because if you're selling in marketplaces, you don't have visibility.
Well, yes, and you might have a lot of things that are like one touch because if
Yep.
it's transactional, it's
Yeah.
different. So anyway, not to get off on the
We'll leave the
B2C.
B2C to the B2C people.
Will somebody B2C take this conversation and run with it from here? But yeah, I do think getting buy-in from the beginning, getting multiple teams is important. I have somebody right now actually who's trying to actually get budget to do a custom multi-touch attribution model. And they're just like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get extra budget. Like, we're already maxed out in marketing. And I'm sitting here going, why is marketing paying for, like,
Yes.
yes, you're initiating it. Yes, you're trying to be really diligent, but you're not building just a marketing attribution model. You're building a attribution model for the company. And so whether that comes out of a general budget or a tech budget, or you and sales split it, like, this is something that you have buy-in from the sales team, you have buy-in from your CFO. Like, if we're just now at the point of figuring out where to pull the dollars, like, let's figure out how to make the business case make sense, that this is a business purchase, not a marketing team initiative.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, I think one of the major concerns or pushback points that you'll have to overcome in this conversation is realizing that whatever you choose will have to be good enough nothing will ever be perfect.
Mhm.
And then sort of leveling the conversation to the right person in the company and, making that sell. Is it clarity? Is it, well, it's always clarity. That's why we're doing this. But like, what is the primary thing that you're looking for out of this effort? And then, reaching across the company to meet the need of the person that you're trying to get buy-in from. So if it's the CEO, talk about how this impacts the entire company. If it's the marketing team, then talk about how it impacts your 3-year strategy and your growth.
Mhm.
And so there's really not all that much to figure out, but there's a lot of nuance to how those conversations can go and break down.
Absolutely. Tomorrow we'll get into the nuance you talked about, which is how to do influence versus actual when we're talking through attribution. I'm really excited about that conversation. So we'll get into that. But thank you guys for joining us today, Sarah and Danielle. And we'll be back around tomorrow with some more Lunchable go-to-market ops. Thanks.